Welcome back to the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, and today I'm going to be talking you through some astrology, and actually I'm talking you through the time that was elected for the Stellium Astrology podcast's launch. And the reason I want to do that is because it's possible for you to be able to understand my mission and kind of what I hope the podcast is going to achieve through the chart that I elected for it. And it is a very difficult year to elect a chart, because we've had, obviously you've got your usual Mercury retrogrades, but we've got the huge Saturn-Pluto conjunction that happened back in January, and Jupiter's in the mix there as well. But we've also got a Venus retrograde to navigate, which we fortunately have, and we are out of there now. But we now have a Mars retrograde coming up, which we have to navigate. So that's what makes this year a little bit more challenging. There's a lot of difficult planetary happenings which kind of make it a bit more difficult to pick. The point of election was not to pick the perfect date, as my teacher said. It's not necessarily about picking a perfect chart, it's about avoiding a bad one. So this year there's an awful lot of difficult aspects and challenging things going on up there, which, as you're probably aware from seeing what's happening on planet Earth around you, it's a challenging landscape that we're working with at the moment. So what we need to do is we need to find favourable moments and then kind of plot our plans into those favourable moments and get the best out of those moments. And that's what I'm hoping the elected chart for this podcast has done. I hope I've picked a favourable time to launch it, to give it, essentially to give the podcast its birthday. And this really is a creative passion of mine. So I am, in a sense, giving birth to this podcast. And fortunately, I have opted for a podcast C-section at a specific time and date. So this has an elected birth date that I think will be most suitable for the podcast, for the listeners, and for myself. So I wanted to dive into some astrology, and instead of making it about I don't want to overcomplicate things. I fear I might by doing this, because I know that there are listeners of a variety of different levels of experience with astrology listening to this podcast, but I wanted to explain my elected chart to you, or share it with you, and so you can try and understand it now, or perhaps even come back at a later date and analyse it yourself once you've got the tools to be able to understand. So this is the chart I have elected. Starts at 9:38 in the morning, and that's British summertime. I think that's universal time plus 1, I believe. I can't be entirely sure. So just go for BST. And it's on the 29th of July 2020. And my chart is located in Northampton, because that's where I'm recording this episode. Now, initially, let's go straight in the front door. And the elected launch of the podcast has Virgo rising. Now, the rising sign and the ascendant, that means the same thing. And Virgo rising is practical and discerning. It's detail orientated, methodical, and down to earth. I hope you find me down to earth. You might think I'm a bit of a space cadet. I think I'm a nice balance between the two. But hopefully through this podcast we can make sense of a very complex subject, and that is essentially what astrology is. Unfortunately, it's very complex and very there's just so many, it's just so multifaceted. There's so many levels to astrology. So my aim is really to kind of help you start with the basics and really make sense of things. And that's that lovely Virgo ascendant that sits as the front door of the chart. We want to go through the make sense of everything door. And once we're inside that front door, we can then look towards the sun. And the position of the sun is in the community-orientated 11th house of friendships and connecting. So, sometimes the 11th house is about finding your tribe, finding your community, and sometimes it's about working on a project together. And as I previously mentioned, I would like this to be a kind of listener-led podcast. So, if you get in touch with me, want to share your chart details, if I have the opportunity to share it, I will. Perhaps if we want to talk about a specific area and I think your chart symbolises that, then I would absolutely love to share your chart. So, perfect position for the sun, because I'll be finding my stellium friends through this podcast and hopefully connecting with you in a place where we have a common interest, which is exploring a very fascinating subject together. And, the sun in Leo is very hearty and benevolent and also humorous, which I do think that, I would like to have a little humorous edge to this podcast. I hope you agree. And also quite generous. And, I want to be generous with the information I've learned over the years because I think it's important to share. And, yeah, of course, very cheerful. So I'm not going to say I'm going to be perfect and over the top happy every single time I record an episode. You never know. I hope so. But, I don't want to be superficial, but I do generally tend to err on the side of optimism and cheer, which is strange for a Capricorn like myself. So next we have the moon, and the moon is where we seek nourishment, or where we reach, where we have received nourishment in our lives, and a kind of sense of connection, and a sense of a different type of community, kind of a sense of belonging. And actually the moon happens to fall into the third house of communication and ideas. So this probably means that we are going to share a shared kind of hunger for information gathering and idea sourcing and connecting of the dots. And it just happens to be in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a lovely teacher type moon. So, you'll be learning and labelling things, but also in the house of school, but with the sign of the teacher there, kind of hopefully leading you. A very enthusiastic, optimistic and fun teacher. And so that's the sun and the moon, both in fire signs, which are quite inspired. And then we have, I'm skipping to Mars. Mars happens to be in his home sign of Aries, which is a lovely placement for Mars because he just feels very at home. It's like having somebody going for a run, and instead of putting them on, in the local park, just running over a hilly sort of terrain, it's like plonking Mars down on the racetrack, ready to go at the sound of the gun. It's just putting him in the right environment for him to perform his best. And he just happens to be moving through the 8th house of mysteries. So it's a really nice placement for an independent and very self-motivated planet and sign to be plonked down into an area which is quite difficult to see with the naked eye. You have to kind of dig a bit to go into the 8th house, and it's quite delving into the underworld almost. And, looking at mystery subjects like astrology and the things that you find through astrology, and leading the way into exploration. And, definitely astrology is something that offers a lot of gifts to the person who's looking for answers, basically. And self-exploration is key. So it's very wonderful, very revealing, and Mars in the 8th house really does leave no stone unturned. So hopefully I am going to satisfy a lot of people who are really itchy and desperate to get to the bottom of things. Now, Venus, who comes before Mars usually, she happens to be in chatty Gemini. And fortunately, she also happens to be at the top of the chart, elevated in the 10th house. And so that really puts at a height of priority the pleasure and joy of the discovery of ideas and sharing of information very high on all of our agendas. And also Venus happens to be up there in the 10th house, very popular, very likeable and very charming. So you should find that this gives us an overarching sense of just genuinely enjoying this podcast. That's my hope, anyway. And now let's get on to Mercury, because Mercury tends to be quite an important planet when you're talking about a project based around communication, because Mercury is the communicator. He does like to share and spread ideas. And he also happens to be elevated in the 10th house, but he's in Cancer this time. So he's a bit more of a storyteller, quite poetic, concerned with arranging information in a way that's beneficial to other people's needs. Oh, excuse me. Speaking of Mercury, tripping me up, And yes, it's quite nice really for Mercury to be up there in the 10th house, because that also places quite a sense of importance on his job, his role in this podcast. So another thing that's quite nice is he's going to make a very optimistic aspect, a sextile, to Uranus, the planet which a lot of people connect with astrology. And he's definitely a planet which is a thinking outside the box kind of planet. He's considered to be an awakener. He's very good, especially in contact with Mercury. When they talk to each other, they really love to explore abstract ideas, get into concepts rather than necessarily, having things written down in lists like Virgo might. So coming into conceptual thinking and abstract ideas. And through that, they tend to be there's quite an enlightenment through thought and conversation. So that's a lovely little... I quite happen to like the chart that I've elected for this podcast, even though it is currently being elected in a very challenging year for everybody. So there weren't many dates this year that were actually going to be very good to elect. And, maybe if I'd waited for a number of months, I could have done better. But I wanted to get going. Perhaps it's because that Mars in Aries energy, it just really wants you to sort of hit the ground running. So just touching on a couple of other things here, we've got a stellium in Capricorn. I will talk about stelliums later on in another episode. Plenty of stelliums, actually. Well, I'm going to go into it. But at the moment, I'm going to keep it simple. So we've got a stellium, which means that there's at least three planets in one sign or house. And we've got gregarious and questing for meaning Jupiter. And he's holding hands with investigator and detail-obsessed Pluto. And also, they happen to be standing next to, very closely, pretty much holding hands, but probably not a good idea during a global pandemic, serious and structured Saturn in his home sign of Capricorn. So it's Capricorn is about providing structure and, definitely about getting serious and about kind of, sticking to rules. There are rules with astrology. Yes, there are rules. Yes, there are ways to do things, but it's also, it can be an intuitive subject too. It depends what your approach is. And I'm an open-minded person. I like a bit of both. So, this triple conjunction, Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto all sitting together. Now, Saturn and Pluto often only get together, I think, once every 35 or 36 years. So that's quite rare. But for Jupiter to also be involved with those two planets, it's a 735-year cycle. So that's happening now. How wonderful. And not the best combination of planets to ever have in a chart, but actually maybe for the listeners of this podcast it is, because we want to learn, we want to find deeper meaning, we want to understand what's going on with the world, we want to dig to the bottom, we want to look for the truth and be authentic with ourselves, and we want to make sense, and we want to provide structure for ourselves and learning about boundaries, about how to respect this amazing craft that predates anything that I know, any kind of historical record. And Capricorn is a sign, it's a dual sign of, it's an earth sign, and it's the sea goat. So the goat is the hooved little mountain scaling, seeking, the higher perspective and being able to survey the land below it. And then you've got the sea goat, the watery, spiritually connected tail of the fish. So it's a really nice sign, actually, to have laying at the bottom of the entire chart, which really describes a sense of deep change and transformation and a real sense of searching for meaning within ourselves, because the fourth house is the lowest part of the chart and also kind of describes the psychological basement. So we're really going to be delving deep through this subject. And Neptune, dreamy Neptune, happens to be sitting in sensitive and spiritual Pisces, longing to reconnect with the source that it came from and tapping into the ancient language of astrology as a way to communicate with the reality it finds it's so alien to connect with. Now, I'm not saying all Pisces are, unable to process reality or deal with reality. There's plenty of Pisceans doing a great job of that, but the essence of Pisces isn't to be very earthbound, and it does look towards subjects that help it get a sense of connecting with something far bigger than ourselves, far bigger than humanity. You know, it's like the drop in the ocean. And that happens to be sitting in the other person aspect, the opposite side to the rising sign. So the setting sign, the descendant, being in Pisces. So it means that hopefully by doing what we're doing, I'm going to be reaching out to people who are actually searching for something a little bit more, who do really want to find deeper answers and a deeper meaning to life, which actually helps them connect with something, that invisible thing that connects all humanity, and not just the humans, not just the animals, but everything from the core of who we are, but right out into the ends of the universe. It's just, you know, the sense of connection with everything. And I feel like astrology really does bring that for me. So I really hope that the people that do come and find me through this podcast are going to get that same sense too. And just finally, we do have the nodes, the lunar nodes. I will definitely discuss this at some point. And they are in the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, Gemini and Sagittarius being opposite signs. Again, reiterating the learning and teaching kind of seesaw, and it's Sagittarius is also concerned with broadcasting, and as I previously mentioned, the fourth house, where the Sagittarius, the south node in Sagittarius sits, happens to be the psychological basement, and reaching up to the Gemini north node in the 10th house of mastery and achievement and aspiration. So I'm hoping that we can learn how to truly become the best expressions of ourselves through exploring deep within ourselves, applying astrological principles and techniques to ourselves, and then reflecting them outwards, and, you know, engaging with our environment and going out into the world and applying some of these things that we've learned and really understanding the world with a whole new layer of meaning. So I'm sorry if a lot of that sounded like gobbledygook. It's actually not gobbledygook. It really will make sense to you. All I ask is that you put some time in, listen to some of these podcast episodes, make some notes as you go along, and you should, as time goes by, with some of the book recommendations that I give you, I'm hoping, really start to understand and really connect with the subject of astrology, which has brought me so much happiness and so much inner freedom that I just want to share it with everybody that I meet. So thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, rate and review this episode. If you enjoyed it, this podcast, please do click subscribe, please rate it and please review it, because it just really helps me to connect with other people. As you know now, my mission through explaining the chart, I really want people to get something out of this in the way that I have. And, I want to attract my people. I want to attract my tribe. So make it easier for them to find me. And, you know, if you do leave me a review, I'm definitely going to give you a shout out on the episode. And if you'd like a chance for your chart to be discussed during one of these episodes, please just join my mailing list and you'll be sent a link with further information on that. And definitely come and say hello to me on social media, and come and see me on Instagram and Facebook, and I will try and respond on Twitter. I shared my gripes with Twitter in the previous episode. I feel like I was being a little bit hard on it. I didn't mean to be. Sorry, Twitter, and the Twitter community. I do think it's a really awesome social media tool. I'm still kind of learning it. So yeah, come and find me on social media, come and say hi. And also there is a free community on Facebook called the Stellium Astrology Community. So come and join me there too. And that's kind of it for today. So thanks very much for listening. And during the next episode, I'm just going to offer some pointers for you over the next couple of episodes about books that you can read, and also how to get some free astrology software. So tune in. Take care. Bye now.